It's been up and down and in and out all the last hour or so. I'll make this short and sweet just in case we lose a connection. I'm only looking like I'm about 2 out of 10 on signal here. Let me thank our patrons to the project. Henrul, Colton, Eric, Rowley, Suris, Zeshi, Travis Adams, Ian Chen, Convert Me, Stephen Early, Eat Meal, James Fitzwater, History Minor, Ralph McFadden, Pelagia, Ralph J. Pledger, brand new to this stream, Benjamin Simpson, Slava, Speed of Sound Studio, Damn Wing, Command Cyborg, Doronku, Jelly, The Lavender Lady, Totus Riao, Christopher Johnson, our friends Antoine Bott, Steve Bauman, Marigale Beddoes, Daniel Insects Are Cool, Nana, Morton Nielsen, Paul the Skeptic, Puffalophagus Bo, Rasmussen, Devin Reeves, Alex Stone, Paul Williams, and our legacy patrons who I will continue to thank: Jen, Jody, Mike, John, Keith, Andrew, Dyer, Yui, Mona, Brad, Daniel, Staggle, Sun, Sky Stone, Ugly German Truths, Everett, Vince Sanson, Sewer, Weisbaum. Yeah. Every one of you keeps things going. In case we lose out on a signal, as I said, I'll definitely be putting all of the linkages and stuff up on the screen. We're continuing with the source analysis of replacing Darwin. Old Nathaniel Jensen is still going on about genetics and trying to morph them into his young earth creationist framework. He's got some stuff on another variety of nematode worm, a 2011 paper by Molnar, which is another can of worms he probably shouldn't be opening up. So I'll be posting a linkage to that. And also Rudel. Hello. Yes, well, I won't say it's great this week, Dawn. Hi, all. But it is at least holding on. Tornado in a junkyard. Yay. We've got book has arrived at a local library. Excellent. Yes. A nice way to make the old RJ happy would be everybody out there buy my book and donate it to your library, or urge your local library to get a copy of the same. Rock over there, Evolution Slam Dunk, Logs of Phileas Fogg, all of the above. I donated a copy of Evolution Slam Dunk to our local library. It has not yet seen the light of day, but the Paralogs of Fog, at least, is now available at my library. So there we go. Now, the part 2 on this is actually the massive one, because this is riffing off some follow-up that Joel Duff did a little ways back, where he was talking about material from young earth creationism. And he mentioned a 2021 posting by Harry Sanders, which is a pseudonym, by the way, on slug evolution and how there is no evidence for it. I'll be putting the link up to that little thing. And I was prompted to say, okay, let's go looking through the sources that he's got. So there's a 2001 paper by Wade on land sale phylogeny, and a 2002 paper by Rieseberg, which from PNAS was thought to claim supported, quote, nor does it explain how semi-slugs persist when they are evolutionarily disfavored, unquote, when the paper named no claim about disfavored mutation stopping change in slugs or otherwise, but rather how, quote, directional selection is the primary cause of speciation. So the paper was about something else. And because all of this is open access, you'll all be able to put a link to it. Hi, Zmorph. Hi, Vesta. I'm running at a not too bad 50% level, so hopefully we'll hold on. I gave a link for Jackson, but Jackson is in a discussion with a creationist on his another channel that he started up probably over an hour ago, so it's unlikely that he's going to be showing up today, and I still got to catch his conversation later on. So it's tag team jump down. Brand new work on the slugs from 2021, which Sanders cited, and he flipped it off as, quote, what evidence then of evolution do the evolutionists have that snails evolved into slugs by means of semi-slugs? Outside of phylogenetic trees, which make great graphics but poor explanations, evidence is sparse, unquote. Oh, golly gosh, no. The Guzman paper actually represented the very first time, and this is from 2021, brand new paper, the first 12S RNA mitochondrial genome study of mollusks, which would make Sanders's rejection of it rather premature, because this is a matter of, they're still in the data collecting field as to working out what's all going on. But some of the peripheral papers that Sanders cited are actually inadvertently more interesting than he wanted. There's an old 1982 paper, which even pops up in the Wikipedia discussion of slugs, that I'll be putting a note of, which took note of, quote, some evolutionary trends could be inferred in the reproductive systems of the diulic Althorae, development of a discrete prostate and a distinct oviducal gland, and a general shortening of the reproductive tract, illustrative of a different stage in a possible evolutionary sequence. That's going back decades, by the way. And that meant that what we got are developmental processes in the semi-slugs that's relevant to what's going on later on in the full-blown slugs that we're all familiar with, and which are the discussion of the various papers involved. Tornado, someone called Nathaniel Jensen to show how evolution is impossible. Yes, oy vey. Yes, that's Jensen is intriguing because he's in a weird little box in current creationism. He's one of those that says, oh, creationists have always accepted transitional forms. No, they haven't. So there's a degree of wheel spinning maneuvering going on. And the thing that was always striking about this book, it's a hard copy thing. It's not terribly compared to Evolution, Slam Dunk, and Parallel, Rocks Were There. That's way more massive. At the moment, it's only got like 260 sources in it, which is just minuscule. And of the technical material, that there's about, 40% of it or so that's technical literature, and about a quarter of it's just young Earth creationist stuff. He's misrepresenting about half of the technical papers that he cites, which I've been discussing week after week, calling attention to them, including the ones that are on this outing this time. And so to see that level of importance and such a sparse documentation for it, and an evasive misrepresentation of it, indicates why nobody's taking Jensen seriously any more than nobody takes Sanford or Carter or any of the other creationist geneticists that keep on publishing their stuff in Answers to Genesis, the Answers Research Journal, and the Journal of Creation and all that. There's a constant spew of stuff coming out about them, but they haven't made any headway in the general scientific community because none of it makes any sense. You can't cram the genetics of these ancient organisms into that 12,000 year or less box. That's the number he bandies about in the book at one point, 12,000 years. And when he actually believes it's all much younger than that, because functionally he's having everything still off the ark 4,500 years ago. So that's a tough row to hoe. Anyway, returning to our slugs, because I want to get this stuff in just in case we lose a signal on the stuff. Then there's another paper from 2010, Martinez Fernandez, which, by the way, Sanders misnamed as if it was written by one of the co-authors. So the sourcing wasn't even entirely accurate. That I discovered when I looked up the original source. That one is regarding gene expression in a particular snail and relating to incipient speciation, which Sanders didn't mention at all. But since he brought that particular taxon up, this Littorinus saxatilis, I found a paper from 2011 by Dolman, which I'll be able to put the link up as well, which Sanders didn't cite, that identified sympatric speciation there was probably taking place about 640,000 years ago. Last time I looked, that's way older than 4,500 years ago or 6,000 years ago in the age of the Earth. And so trying to figure out how the genetics of the existing organisms could be crammed into a tight framework, speedy up all of that genetic change. You can wave a magic wand at it, but you can't justify it on the basis of what we can see with existing mutations, or for that matter, why more species haven't gone extinct with that kind of a mutation rate on there. It's just a complete mess. And remember, this is the same Sanders who in bringing up this subject of slugs, made zero effort to tell us how many kinds there are. 1, 2, 5, 10, all within a genus, within a family. Family is the typical creationist thing. In other words, hey, you're going to bring up a topic, show us your model. Give us an explanation of why we should be impressed with the creationist model having such explanatory power by applying it. And yet, he didn't think to do that. It's entirely a negative hole poking in the supposed evolutionary problems argument in his post, not here's our superior version, which we can explain in detail. No. So why young Earth creationism always is never going to go anywhere. And so it's fun to watch it go anywhere. So I decided to contrast that with some of the other work that's been done on this particular topic that Sanders didn't pay any attention to and that predates the Sanders. So one is a 2016 paper regarding the tendency for shell reduction in gastropods. It's a very detailed paper. And then there's a 2019 paper that Sanders somehow didn't notice by Shilyeko that went on out more details on organ reduction, fast and slow in mollusks. And unfortunately, the paper isn't open access, but I've seen the text, and the viewers can keep an eye out for it for access in the future. So unfortunately, and that will be a rare instance of me putting up a link to an abstract rather than to the paper itself. But it looks really juicy. I was able to get a full text on it from other means. But anybody that's interested in slugs and that wants to know more about it, that's a paper to look into. So we can check. Yes, it must be those very fast slugs. Yes, that's another good question that's Vesta actually is how the hell, how many slugs were there on the ark? How did they get to the ark? How did they get back to where they are? What's the biogeography in the paleo environment leading out from the ark landing wherever it lands to the present location of slugs? All of that is yet more data field that don't hold your breath on Sanders or anybody else ever coming up with the material on this. It's just not a subject matter. Let's see. Does anybody, now that we actually have some people in the audience, and there any questions or comments on the mess that's been the show for the last few weeks? I'll have to proceed under the assumption that the stream is going to be dicey, often is not. So if we can manage to stay on for a full show, that'll be absolutely delightful. And if not, we're screwed. But at the very least, if I'm even on for just a few minutes, this one's been on for 12. That means I can go in and eventually, when it's posted, put in the links to all the various papers and so forth and so on. So the meat of that's there. With some luck, I should be able to keep doing the shows while I'm over on the coast for the holidays. I'll then be back here in January in the new year, 2022. And everyone can look forward to, I wish they'd give up. I can understand the conundrum that they're in because everything about the Bible story suggests that it was an ark that sustained the entire planet and it was a global punishment. It's all part of that. Jesus, too, as in the days of Noah, I think in Luke. And so from their perspective, they've got to have that being a real event because the big guns are talking about it. Because the book explicitly suggests that all the animals were brought on the earth, everything outside of the ark perished, without going into details on insects and plants and all the rest of the stuff, that is kind of an imperative structurally for them. And you can read Young Earth Creation Apologetics on this point. It's a line in the sand that they've never been able to give up on. It got drawn in the sand really when back in the Adventist days, when Ellen White came up with flood geology in the early 20th century. And when that filtered over into the Young Earth Creationist camp that started developing in the 1940s and 50s and then got crystallized in the Henry Morris, Duane Gish era in the 60s and 70s, they're stuck with it now, metaphorically, philosophically, theologically. They can't give it up. Because to do that, would they? How can they deal with it? They've also got the whole young Earth framework that they can't get around by dating up the patriarchs and all the rest. They're on that mountain too. And a global flood, at least, would account for the geological record theoretically. So it's all part of a package deal that if they have to demolish the young Earth, the old Earth geology, and then they can scram it into the flood, it takes no more effort to ignore data to sustain a young Earth creationist concept than it does otherwise. And this is borne out by the fact, let's see what we got in here. Comment from Tornado. I've been arguing that Weiss have been arguing with kept bringing up 8 minimum parts and 250 types in gotcha questions. They eventually came and referenced last days prophecies. Yeah. Well, I don't know where they would have the 850 types, the 250 types from. There has the numbers, and we'll be going into this in volume 2 of The Rocks Were There, on the issues of how many kinds and things there were. We mentioned it briefly in book 1 as well, that creationists had bandied about things of about 50,000 at some time. You get some of that in Kurt Wise. You get some of lower numbers in Woodmarap, where he starts thinking in terms of 20,000 or maybe 8,000. But the new benchmark is the Ark encounter, and we've all Jackson and I have finally been able to get a full listing of all the kinds that are supposedly on the Ark according to the Ark encounter. And remember, it's only about 1,400 and some. And this now opens up a huge can of worms, but at least we know that you could fit those on the Ark. The question is what all are they leaving out, and how arbitrary are they in drawing the lines between some kinds and others? You don't get this at all in old Earth creationism. You don't get it at all in intelligent design. But the 250 kinds would be easy peasy to store on an Ark. But then you'd have to account for how you get all of the organisms afterwards. And that's utterly untenable. Oh, yes, the last days prophecy, why you cannot answer. As I'm not a member of the Antichrist of the Month Club, I don't have to worry about the end times prophecies. And by the way, it should be pointed out that the Donald Trump's Secretary of State, Mike Pompeo, is an end times guy expecting the imminent second coming. So this is not a rarefied, it's just restricted to creationists. There were people making decisions for us and actually being agencies that have these strange sort of attitudes. And that should scare the jabbers out of you. It certainly bothers me enormously. This will be a topic of, to extent, the new book, but also subsequent works on the development of the anti-evolution movement, the culture camp book that one of these days, I want to make that word a household thing, because I think it's the easiest way to describe the mindset that goes on amongst the creationists. It's an old term, German, that was used by Bismarck to describe his culture struggle with the Catholic Church over independent education, because the new empire didn't want to have separate forces there. They wanted to be running the show. And the term is a nice analog to the culture war thing, because it does suggest a kind of a deliciously entrenched dogmatism, and that's something that's really all embracing, because the culture camp is way more than just casual culture wars. It relates to politics and gender identity and economics and social policy and trade policy. I mean, it just spills over into every venue. When you look at the blogs that follow this, Tony Perkins, I'll put him in there just so everyone knows who he is. Tony Perkins, who, not to be confused with the late actor from Psycho, Anthony Perkins, but Tony Perkins and the Council on National Policy. There's another one you can look up on. That's his little group that was just knee deep into the Trump administration. And then there's also his main group, which is the Family Research Council, which I subscribe to his little newsletters and crap that come out there. So he sends them every week. Thank you very much. It's just culture camp central. It deliriously favorable towards any Republican administration, overlooking all of its flaws. So they were okay with the Bush people, and then they were deliriously happy with Trump. And they despised Democrats up the yin yang. So they hated Obama's guts and they despise Biden. And it's a very narrow group of pundits that appear on their network, mainly Tony Perkins, and then maybe a dozen revolving door pundits that pop along in there. So it's one, if you want to get your mitts on the figures that are trying to change the election laws so that they can entrench Republicans at the state level, try to overturn elections that way, try to get anti-abortion laws in, et cetera, you'll find people in the Tony Perkins network there at some stage in the process. And I've been keeping track of this for decades, and I will continue to do so. And there are various people at Religion Dispatches and BuzzFeed and all, or BuzzFeed. And the like that keep track of a lot of these people as part of their looking at the various niches of things. And because it relates to creationism, I pull that together. So there's some of the terms you can write down and look up. The Family Research Council and the Council on National Policy are very secretive about a lot of stuff. Council on National Policy in particular, somebody had to leak their membership list. Which connects up with a whole bunch of politicians in the Republican Party. I think there's virtually no Democrats in there. And it's something to keep track of who connects up with me and with them. And Mark Meadows, Donald Trump's chief of staff, he was in that same network and with a Ken Ham creationist and that. So it's, are they also, racism is a complicated thing with modern Christians. They're potentially quite not racist in the sense that everyone's equal before God and they don't have any problem with black creationists and the like. And you could see the ease with which very conservative people like Herman Cain or Ben Collins, or the brain surgeon guy that was in the Trump administration, Ben Carson, that they don't have any intrinsic that area. However, there is a historic racism in older brand of creationism because too many of the old brand of creationists came out of the South, and they came at it carrying all that baggage that Southern racists had. And that was the case. Matter of fact, we're going to be discussing it in the new book too, in various chapters, that this was something that they've now tried to sweep under the rug. So if all you look at, and many modern creationists will look at the current apologetics, they would be seeing what Answers in Genesis would be posting about how they are not racist, and it's only Darwinist evolutionists that are racist, and they will cherry pick little bits and pieces about stuff. We're going to be going into a lot of that material. And as a historian, it offends the bejabbers out of me because I studied the Civil War, antebellum period, and Reconstruction in college, and I was steeped in what views were done by who. The thing to remember is that with very few exceptions, virtually all anti-evolutionists are extremely conservative religious. That no evidence that Michael Behe of the Discovery Institute was first shooting his mouth on the need to privatize Social Security at the Discovery Institute. They only got into evolution biz a little bit farther down the road when Philip Johnson started ginning them up, and Behe decided to do Black Box. But that isn't where they were necessarily coming from. And the number of non-conservative anti-evolutionists is really limited. William Jennings Bryan is one of the very few examples I can think of offhand of a highly progressive anti-evolutionist, and he would be, apart from his anti-evolutionism, he has much more in common with a Bernie Sanders than anybody that they would find in the modern Republican Party. But Bryan just stands out like a sore thumb on that. Now, the racism that you find individual anti-evolutionists, if, for example, they come from the South, well, they're still carrying baggage. And so the same people who would have been George Wallace racist Democrats, anti-evolutionists back in 1970, might well now be petrified into just as prejudiced right-wing Republican racists. But in terms of how that filters up into the dogma up in the party, it's not so easy. You get a little bit of the same prejudices. Again, it's a section in the new book on the odd remnants of that old creationist racism that you see in some of the postings about who the Noah's kids' wives are in the Ark Encounter. It's all done in a very dense, simplified, tidied up, just big enough for a little label approach. They're not very verbose about it. But I think it's fair to say that modern answers in Genesis and ICR creationism, Jerry Bergman is a perfect example of somebody who posts relentlessly on this, are absolutely steadfast in rejecting any idea that there's racism in the creationism movement. And from a top-down perspective, they're generally right. But that requires them to be historically revisionist, in the same way that modern creationism accepts sort of kind of natural selection, although Guliusa over at ICR wouldn't agree. They sort of accept speciation on a gigantic scale, but often don't. And so there's an awful lot of confusion and muddle that goes on. So as a general principle, I would be very reluctant to bandy about the racism term. I do the same thing with Trumpistas. I don't presume that a Trumpista is intrinsically a racist person, but they do carry a lot of baggage, especially when you mix in the class element, that if they're looking at immigrants and people who have been historically oppressed, the issues of, for example, black ownership of farms, and that and the idea, should there be like reparations for that to make good for all of the generations that they were cheated out of the farm loan system and all that stuff, that you'll find that political conservatives, and you'll find Trumpistas in this background, and you'll find virtually all creationists just won't think about it. It's just boop. So the racism term is one more, I think, of them not thinking about the subject and just deflecting thought about the subject in the same way they do speciation, rather than a conscious hatred of people with particular skin colors or not. So I think it's an area that you would want to tread very, very warily, unless you can find specific instances of where, for example, a judge recently got into trouble. He was using the N-word, supposedly while drunk. Drunk judges, not necessarily a good idea right there. But people carry a lot of baggage around with them. And so there's more than enough reason to regard creationism as a pile of dingoes' kidneys, as I have been showing. I don't need to make any judgments about Jensen and a racism attitude. No, he collapses on a completely different field. And so we don't have to worry about that. So, as to individual conservatives, and I would contend that the odds of finding a racist anti-evolutionist is notably higher than finding a racist pro-evolutionist. And this is the thing, you get one of the obsessions of modern anti-evolutionism, and this crosses the boundary between intelligent design and young Earth creationism, although it's not something that you, Ross, and the old Earth creationists bother a hell of a lot about. But boy, is it an obsession at the Discovery Institute and Answers and that crowd, is that Darwin racism, whoa, and that goes on in the racist thing is due, or a huge block of it is due to that nasty old Darwin guy and Darwinian notions about that all lives don't matter, and that human beings have no morality and ethics, and we're just an evolved ape, and therefore going to go running around, dogs and cats living together. I mean, you can fill in the story all of its own. And it involves a staggering oversimplification of the history. Again, we'll be discussing examples of that there are, in fact, religious racists. There are, in fact, evolutionist racists. There were, in fact, this was much more common in the old days. But when you start looking into their background, you discover that they're coming from the South, They have a background of attitudes about Black people that are arguments in air quotes evolutionary things. Nitwits dress up their art the guise of evolution, and even Darwin. And you find an occasional terrorist or shooter who thinks he's following Darwinian principles. Maybe they haven't actually read much in the way of Darwin. So there we go. It's an area that we can't avoid thinking about, for one thing, because the creationists make such a big deal out of it. And Jerry Bergman, he's one that if you Google him, you'll find a pile on that right off the bat. He is probably the most relentless in the creationist community, try to tar and Darwin. And then over in the intelligent design movement, there's a wide range of ones there. David Klinghoffer and others do posts on that all the time. And it's an oddly parallel set of apologetics. They cherry pick bits out of things. Same on are sexist, and again you go compared, and there it's a more complicated issue. You got to start looking at the actual doc and the actual positions that they took over time, and maybe that area as to measuring severe the Inquisition was, or how many witches were killed during the Inquisition, and witch burnings in the Renaissance and period. There's a whole bunch of things in there, and people have ideologies. They can sometimes jump ahead of the facts with numbers, and that spills over into yet other ideologies. By now we're well away from where we are with creationism. You find pretty much the same level of rationalization among ideological Marxists who understand the idea that Stalin never anybody, and they have a little network genetic literature that they draw on. I just bumping in there. Oh, we're starting to get roboty. Okay, thank you, Zmorph. We'll kind of muddle along in here, maybe for a little bit lower. Yes, I'm down to a lower level on my account. Yeah, I'm still running at 5 out of 10, but we managed to get most of everything in. I may curtail the show early then to avoid going into too much more roboting. Do people have any questions out there before I pull the plug on there? We'll be trying to keep you up to speed on the ongoing work on the new book. Oh boy, we're having fun with it. Both Jackson, Weed, and I we're going to be putting lots of material in a lot of subjects that we're glad now that we didn't try to put everything in book one, because for one thing, an awful lot of new material has come along, and the number of subject matters that we would be bringing up, had we tried to cram it all into a single volume, would have meant leaving a hell of a lot of really neat stuff out. There's so much now on the paleogeology field, which is getting into be a paleogeography of working out continents were and all that. We're in the midst of a really big revolution in the way that new tools are being applied in this area. So there's an awful lot of stuff to come up with. So any questions before I pull the plug on things, and then I'll be able to jump over probably and find what Jackson Wheat was doing in his discussion on the shows. If not, if I got my booster shot, so I'm now covered for the next bit, although I'm generally impervious to viruses anyway, but I'm a civic spirited. How is the audio book coming along? Of Paralogs, that's been shunted on the side because the person that was doing that gratis had other projects and things that happened in his life, so we never got past, I think, chapter 20 or so. We were most of the way through, but not finished on it. So I don't know what will happen on that. There may come a time farther down the road when I can find another collaborator and we can revamp. We'll see what happens on it. I will tell you this: reading the text is time consuming, and doing the takes and getting all of that is a sort of a thing that without a really professional equipment to get it done properly is very laborious. And given the fact that I've had to work on 2 books simultaneously, the second Fog novel and the Rocks Were There, that's a division of labor that I'm not exactly sad that the recording work on the paralogs thing zingled out. Doing an audio book of the science works would require a complete rewrite and a restructuring of it for audio. And that would be a thing all on its own. Once we get through with the whole projects on there, that's something that I would want to consider for the future, the idea of doing an audiobook version, but it would require doing a complete revamp of the text because you just can't read footnotes or notes. It just would be chaos. So you have to figure out how to restructure everything and then provide documentation in a downloadable file. If we can get some things going with some new websites that we can use for like merch, that in addition to the mug that has sort of Tortugan sayings and stuff on there and all sorts of methods issues on there and the t-shirts and merch to get, also potentially audio books and downloadable. That would be a venue that will work on that. So, Vesta, eligible for booster shot after I had gotten my original Johnson & Johnson way back in April, so it was a matter of just any time. And we have a website here in Washington, so I just looked at the thing, and there was a place that was really close, but they were all booked up when I called them. So I found another place a little bit farther down in town that slipped me right in. Boop. And so I wanted that out of the way so I would be all covered when I went over to the coast for relatives through Christmas and New Year, so we wouldn't have to worry about all of that. Bringing my little mask and all that with me, et cetera, et cetera. So anyway, everybody stay safe. If you're anywhere in the track of tornadoes, which now is starting to move into other areas. So there's now getting winter tornadoes that you didn't get before. All those areas, if you hear sirens, run for the hills. And some of these places probably don't even have air raid sirens operational. So everybody that has apps should probably stay very close attention to these things. Because we're in a new environment where in some respects the but now it's worse in places at all. And you got tornado systems that run 200 miles an hour and on a scale that's completely fresh. And so they're getting and killing people, blowing their cities to smithereens in the dead of winter, which is not a fun time to have things on top of stuff. And then there's just a report that I saw in the evening news about the prospect that the Antarctic big shelf is going to maybe fall off there, and that all on its own could raise the sea level by 2 feet or more in a very short time. And that is going to make it fun if you're living in Miami or anywhere that's like close to water. So anyway, oh yes, have Evolution Slam Dunk. I think the rocks were their Kindle version. Yes, tell everybody you know about the books and recommend them for Christmas gifts, etc., etc. Spread the word about it. If you haven't reviewed them on make sure that you do, and let everybody know about it, because it's all partly through word of mouth that we go on things. Thanks again for this support for my clunky little program here. Hopefully people can make a good use out of the source material that I'm bringing up in here, an awful lot of which will end up in the work, although Jensen only pops up peripherally in the rocks were there. It's one that in future there'll be big issues that I may be bringing them up on other areas. And of course, there's so many people that have gone into it with a professional angle. We'll be alluding to some of that. Dan Stern Cardinale, who's a geneticist, has been lighting into him. And then on the other matters where they bump into paleontology, particularly primates, Gutsick, Gibbon, and others have gone into this sort of stuff. So there's quite a lot of people in our network who have been dealing with this. So anyway, everybody, next week will be hopefully an operational show. If not, I'll say Merry Christmas. See my little over there. That's 40. We're having connection issues, so there we go. We're in our mess zone. So we will end the stream and see you next week.